The notification came through at 11:43 at night, Portuguese time, while I was sitting on a terrace in Lisbon watching the river and thinking about nothing in particular. My phone lit up with a motion alert from the Ring doorbell I'd installed at my lake house in Cedar Cove, Tennessee, 5 months earlier, and when I opened the app and pulled up the live feed, I was so confused by what I saw that I closed it and opened it again, the way you do when your brain needs a second to accept that the image is real and not some kind of display glitch. A woman was standing in my front doorway of a house I had been 6,000 miles away from for 4 weeks, and she was carrying a large plastic storage bin inside, the kind people use when they're moving belongings from one place to another with the intention of keeping them there. She was wearing her hair pulled back and had what appeared to be a key in her hand, because the door was open and she'd clearly used something to open it, and the something was not a key I had given her, because I had not given this woman a key to my house, had not given her permission to enter my house, and did not, in any interpretation of events I could construct, understand why she was standing in my doorway at 11:40 at night, moving what appeared to be her belongings inside. Her name was Sandra Keel. She was the president of the Cedar Cove Lake Community Association, which was the HOA that governed the small lakeside development where my vacation property sat. I had interacted with her exactly twice in the 3 years I'd owned the property, once when I submitted an application to add a dock extension, which she'd approved, and once at a community social event the previous summer where she'd told me, in passing, that the lake house community was lucky to have owners who actually invested in their properties, a comment I'd taken as a compliment and promptly forgotten. What I did not know, in that moment on the Lisbon terrace, was that Sandra Keel had been in that house before that night. I did not know that what I was watching was not an arrival, but a continuation, the latest trip in a pattern of access that had been going on for at least 2 weeks. I did not know that my HOA president had, somewhere in the preceding month, obtained a copy of my house key through means I would spend the next several weeks piecing together, and had been using my vacation property as, by all available evidence, her own vacation property, while I was in Europe, and the house sat apparently empty and unmonitored. Or so she thought. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 47, I work in supply chain consulting, and for the past 3 years, the Cedar Cove Lake House has been my anchor, the place I go when work gets heavy and the city gets loud, and the place I spend most of August every year when my schedule allows. Meredith, my wife, is the reason we found it. She grew up going to a lake house with her family in western North Carolina, a wood-sided place on a still lake where her grandfather fished every morning before anyone else woke up, and she'd carried that memory around for 30 years as the standard against which most good things were quietly measured. When she found the Cedar Cove listing, she didn't tell me about it for 2 days because she was afraid to want it too much. Then she sent me the link at 7 in the morning with 3 words in the subject line: "This is it." We bought it 4 months later. We'd invested meaningfully in the property over 3 years: new kitchen appliances, the dock extension, a full HVAC replacement, new furniture throughout that Meredith had spent several genuinely enjoyable months selecting with the care she brought to anything she cared about. The house felt like something we'd built together, even though we'd bought it fully standing, which I think is what any good renovation does. It makes the place yours in a way the transaction alone never quite accomplishes. I'd also, 2 summers ago, installed a full smart home security package that I'd been slowly expanding since. Ring doorbell with a wide-angle camera, 4 additional exterior cameras covering the back porch, the dock approach, the driveway, and the side yard, a smart lock on the front door that could be operated remotely through an app, and a secondary smart deadbolt on the interior basement door. I'd installed all of this primarily because the lake house sat empty for months at a time, and because the Galloway's 3 doors down had experienced a break-in 2 winters earlier that had shaken the whole lane and motivated me to know what was happening at my property from distance rather than not. From 600 miles, or as it turned out, 6,000. The camera system was the single best investment I had ever made in my life, dollar for dollar, when the full scope of what Sandra Keel had been doing in that house became clear over the following weeks. I pulled up all 4 exterior camera feeds after the motion alert, and what I saw across the combination of them told a very specific story. Sandra had arrived by car, parked in my driveway in a vehicle I could see clearly on the driveway camera, walked to my front door with a key, let herself in, and was currently moving what appeared to be a second or third load of materials into the interior. The storage bin was followed. Over the next 40 minutes of footage I watched in real time from the Lisbon terrace, by 2 large duffel bags, a hanging garment bag, a case of what appeared to be wine or other beverages, and a small tabletop fan, which was an oddly specific detail that would later, in court, become one of the most useful pieces of evidence I had, because the tabletop fan was traceable to a receipt. I called Meredith, who was in New York, and told her what I was watching. She was silent for a moment that felt longer than it probably was, and then she said, with a precision that told me she'd already processed the full situation faster than I had, "Call the attorney first. Don't call her, don't call the police yet, call the attorney, and then call the police." I called our property attorney, a woman named Gwen Alcott, at midnight Lisbon time, which was a little after 6 in the evening in Nashville. Gwen picked up on the 3rd ring, and when I described what I was watching on my phone in real time, did something I found oddly reassuring. She laughed. Not at me, not with cruelty, just the short, genuine laugh of a lawyer who has seen a great deal of human behavior and is occasionally still surprised by it. "Okay," she said. "Don't do anything yet. Keep recording. When does the camera footage auto-archive?" I told her the system archived to a cloud server continuously with a 30-day rolling backup. "Good," she said. "This is going to be fine, Marcus. It's going to be very fine. Just keep watching and let me make a call." The call Gwen made was to a colleague of hers, a civil litigation attorney named Drew Patel, who handled property and trespass cases with a specific focus on damages, and who, when Gwen briefed him in a conference call that included me from the Lisbon terrace at nearly 1 in the morning local time, asked a sequence of questions that told me immediately he was already building a case in his head while he was still getting the facts. "When were you last physically in the property?" Drew asked. 4 weeks ago, last day of July. I left for Europe on August 2nd. "And you had no arrangement, written or verbal, with anyone to access or use the property in your absence?" "No one. The caretaker who does the lawn has a code for the exterior utility closet. Nobody has a key or an access code to the main house." "The smart lock on the front door, is it currently showing as unlocked or locked?" I checked the app. The lock showed as unlocked, having been opened, presumably by Sandra's key, and not relocked. "Unlocked," I said. "Don't relock it yet," Drew said, which surprised me. "If she's inside and you remote lock it, it creates a complication. We want her inside, her belongings inside, the camera record of her entering, and the police on record seeing the situation as it is before any lock change happens. That's the cleanest picture for both the criminal side and the civil side." He explained that what Sandra had done, occupying a residential property without the owner's knowledge or permission, regardless of how she'd obtained the key, constituted criminal trespass, which in Tennessee carried criminal penalties, and potentially residential burglary, depending on how the key had been obtained, which it might well have been through unauthorized means since I had never given it to her. On the civil side, the unauthorized occupation of a property, combined with whatever use she'd made of the utilities, appliances, furnishings, and amenities in the house during whatever period she'd been there, created a civil damages claim for unauthorized use of private residential property, and the longer and more documented the occupation was, the more substantial that claim became. "The goal tonight," Drew said, "is to have law enforcement see the situation in situ. Once they've documented it and she's been removed or has voluntarily left with an officer present, then we talk about locking the property down completely. Can you get a neighbor or someone you trust to go to the property tonight and meet the police there?" I could. 3 doors down from my house lived a couple named Ray and Tess Galloway, who I'd known since I bought the place, the same neighbors whose break-in experience had motivated my own camera installation. I called Ray. He picked up on the second ring because Ray Galloway is 71 years old and goes to bed at 9, and wakes up at midnight to watch old westerns, a schedule he's maintained without embarrassment for decades. I explained the situation. Ray said, "I'll be there in 3 minutes," in the tone of a man who had been waiting for a reason to be involved in something interesting, and he walked out his door before I had finished saying thank you. The Cedar Cove Sheriff's Substation dispatched a deputy within 20 minutes of my call to the non-emergency line, which Gwen had advised me to use rather than 911, given that this was a property situation rather than an active violence situation. The deputy who arrived was a calm, experienced man named Deputy Terry Hooks, who had apparently been working the lake community area long enough to know most of the residents by sight, which meant that when he knocked on the door of my house and Sandra Keel opened it, he recognized her immediately. That recognition cut both ways. It meant he knew she was the HOA president and a longtime area resident, but it also meant he had no ambiguity about who the person inside a property they clearly did not own was. Ray Galloway was standing in my driveway when the deputy arrived and provided him with the context that I was the property owner currently in Portugal, that I had not authorized anyone to stay at the house, and that I was watching the situation live via the camera system and was available by phone if the deputy needed to speak with me directly. Deputy Hooks called me, and I walked him through the key details: my ownership of the property, the date I'd left for Europe, the absence of any arrangement with Sandra or anyone else to use the house, and the notification I'd received that evening showing her arriving with belongings. I could hear, faintly, Sandra's voice in the background while I spoke with Deputy Hooks, and what she was saying, which Hooks repeated to me calmly and without editorial, was that she had authorization to use the property, that the arrangement had been made informally, and that there had been some kind of verbal understanding between herself and me about the house being available for community association use during my absence. There was no such understanding. There had never been any such understanding. I told Deputy Hooks that clearly and on record. I also told him, because it seemed relevant, that I had never had any conversation with Sandra Keel about my house being available to anyone during my absence, that I had not communicated with her about any such arrangement verbally or in writing, and that the only communications I'd had with her in 3 years were the dock extension approval and a brief social conversation at a community event. Deputy Hooks conveyed this to Sandra. I heard her voice change register. The confident, explanatory tone dropped into something quieter and more careful, the particular shift in vocal energy you hear from someone who has just realized that the story they were prepared to tell is not going to work. She was asked to leave the property that evening, and her belongings were left inside pending the situation being sorted through proper channels, which was standard procedure according to Deputy Hooks, who explained that because belongings were present and the situation had a civil dispute element, the immediate priority was getting Sandra off the property, not necessarily removing her things in the dark while everything was still being established. He issued her a verbal notice that she was not to return to the property and that the matter would be documented in his report. Sandra left. Ray Galloway watched her go and texted me after she'd driven away. She did not look happy. I texted back that I didn't imagine she was, thanked Ray, and turned my attention back to the attorney conversation. Now, Drew said, when I called him back, we can change the locks. I opened the Yale Smart Lock app, navigated to the Cedar Cove front door, and changed the access code. Then I navigated to the August Smart deadbolt for the basement and changed that code too, from a terrace in Lisbon. I locked my Tennessee Lake house against anyone who might try to enter it, and watched on the camera feed as the small indicator lights on the locks blinked through their reprogramming sequence and settled into their new configuration. The process took about 4 minutes. What happened in the following 4 minutes after I locked the house was not something I expected. Sandra Keel came back. Not immediately, not dramatically, not with any apparent awareness that I'd just changed the codes on both locks from a phone in Europe, but about 20 minutes after she'd left with Deputy Hooks watching, a set of headlights came back down the lane toward my driveway, and the camera feed showed her car stopping, Sandra getting out, walking to my front door, and using what appeared to be her key to attempt to unlock it. The key turned in the mechanism, the way a key does when the lock cylinder accepts it, but the code I just changed meant the smart lock's digital component refused to disengage, and the door didn't open. She tried twice more, looking at the key each time with the expression people have when they're trying to understand why a familiar object has stopped working in a familiar way. Then she tried the code pad. She entered a sequence, which was presumably the access code she'd somehow known previously, and the lock rejected it with a soft red indicator blink. She stood at my door for almost 3 minutes, trying combinations, trying the key, trying the door handle. Ray texted me, "She's back." I called Deputy Hooks, who was still in the area, and told him the subject had returned to the property and was attempting entry. He was back in my driveway in under 10 minutes. This time the interaction was different. Deputy Hooks issued a formal trespass warning, which in Tennessee is a documented notice that creates criminal exposure for any subsequent unauthorized return to a property. Sandra Keel, standing in my driveway at 2:15 in the morning, received a formal trespass warning for a house she had apparently been using as her own personal vacation property for the better part of 2 weeks, and which she had just discovered she could no longer enter because its owner had changed the locks from Portugal. I watched all of this on my phone from 6,000 miles away, with Gwen Alcott still on a conference call listening to the audio feed I was running through my laptop's speakers. When Sandra's car finally left my driveway the second time and the lane went quiet, Gwen said something I wrote down in my notes that same night because it struck me as exactly right. Whatever she told herself this situation was, she knows now what it actually is. She did, and in the morning, I started making the calls that would make sure everyone else knew too. The first call was to Clearwater Commons Community Association's own legal counsel, because the woman who had occupied my house without permission was, in her professional capacity as the HOA president, the fiduciary steward of a homeowners association that included my property. Whatever she'd done personally, her role in that organization was a separate issue that needed addressing through a separate channel. I got the HOA Council's contact information from Brent, who had nothing to do with Cedar Cove specifically, but who had, over the previous months of being a reliable property manager in my experience, earned enough of my trust that I wanted his read on the situation. He gave me the contact without comment, and when I thanked him he said, simply, "Document everything, Marcus." He had no idea how far ahead of him I already was. The second call was to Drew, who was already working on what he described the previous night as a civil complaint with more substance than he usually saw this early in a case. He wanted the full camera archive for the preceding 30 days, which I arranged to download and preserve that morning, still sitting in my Lisbon apartment. What that archive contained, when Drew and his paralegal went through it systematically over the following 2 weeks, was something that built the case from what I'd thought was a single-night event into something considerably more substantial. Sandra Keel had been in my house 11 times over the preceding 22 days. 11. The first entry was the day after I left for Europe. Over the course of those 22 days, she had entered through the front door using a key she should never have had, stayed for periods ranging from a few hours to 2 full nights, used what the camera exterior coverage and smart home energy monitoring data showed to be my kitchen, my television, my deck, my dock, and my kayak, and on 2 occasions had what appeared, from the driveway camera footage, to be a second person with her. She had been living in my lake house, freely, comfortably, and repeatedly, in the apparent belief that a property sitting empty for the summer was a resource she had the right to use because she was the HOA president and nobody was watching. Drew's voice, when he called me after finishing the archive review, had the particular quality of a litigator who has just been handed significantly more than he expected. "Marcus," he said, "this is not a trespass case anymore. This is an unauthorized occupation case with 11 documented entries, documented use of personal property, including a watercraft, documented multi-night stays, and a criminal element in the obtaining of the key that I intend to pursue separately. What was your lake house last appraised at? I told him. Good, he said. And do you have documentation of what was in the house before you left? Inventory, insurance policy, any photos? I did. I had the home insurance documentation, which included a contents inventory and replacement values. And I also had, as it happened, a detailed walkthrough video I'd made before leaving for Europe, something I'd started doing routinely after the Galloways break-in, walking through every room and narrating what was there and its general condition. You made a walkthrough video, Drew said, not quite a statement, more like a man confirming a detail that had just made his day considerably better. I do it every time before I travel, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I want you to know, he said, that you have done everything exactly right. The cameras, the documentation, the attorney calls before the police, the lock change after the deputy cleared the scene, the archive preservation, the walkthrough video. In my practice, I spend a significant portion of my time helping clients recover from what they did before they called me. In your case, I'm just connecting dots you already drew.